The Atlanta-class light cruisers were the lightest and most lightly armed cruisers to see service with the U.S. Navy during the Second World War and were a product of the London Naval Treaty of 1936. Armed with 5-inch guns, they found a use during the Second World War as anti-aircraft cruisers, but the U.S. Navy hadn't really wanted to build them, and they were only ordered because of problems with a new dual-purpose 6-inch gun. One of the possible Atlanta designs was similar, with 9 6-inch and 6 5-inch guns, but it was very hard to fit these guns into 8,000 tons. Eventually the Navy settled on using the dual-purpose 5-inch gun as the main armament and long-range anti-aircraft gun. The new cruiser carried 8 twin 5-inch gun houses, for a total of 16 guns. 6 of these turrets were mounted on the center line and 2 by the side of the rear superstructure. As a result, only 7 turrets could fire on the broadside. The first batch of Atlanta-class ships carried all 8 turrets, with the 6 centerline turrets carried on 3 levels, making the ships look somewhat like large destroyers. On the second batch the side guns were removed and replaced with 40 mm anti-aircraft guns. On the third batch the middle 4 turrets were all dropped 1 level to reduce top weight. The new ships were significantly smaller than the preceding Brooklyn class. They had a standard displacement of 9,767 tons, were 608 feet 4 inches long and 61 feet 9 inches wide. The new Atlanta-class ships displaced 6,718 tons, were 541 feet 6 inches long and 53 feet 2 inches wide. The basic shape was similar to that of the earlier cruisers, including the fantail stern, even though the Atlanta-class ships didn't carry any aircraft. The superstructure looked more bulky, although that was partly because of the reduced length. The Atlanta-class cruisers were the only American cruisers of the Second World War to have a 2-shaft turbine. There were 4 boilers and 2 fire rooms, with the turbine room between them. They had a top speed of 32.5 knots, although some contemporary publicity claimed they could reach 40 knots. Unusually for American cruisers, the Atlanta-class ships were armed with 8 torpedo tubes, and 2 quadruple mountings taken from Simmons-class destroyers. They were also the only American cruisers to carry depth charges and sonar, but they were poor anti-submarine vessels and the depth charges were later removed. The light anti-aircraft provision changed over time. The first batch were built with 3 quad 1.1-inch mountings, 1 behind the aft control station and 2 by the sides of the bridge. A 4th mounting was later added on the fantail. These were all replaced by 40 mm Bofors guns when they became available. On the second batch the side 5-inch gun houses were replaced with twin 40 mm Bofors mountings. This gave them a total of 8 twin 40 mm mountings. They also carried as many as 18 20 mm guns. The third batch was built with 4 quad and 6 twin 40 mm and 20 mm guns. The torpedo tubes were later removed and the AA firepower increased to 6 quad and 6 twin 40 mm, 20 single and 2 twin 20 mm guns. The 20 mm guns were later replaced by 8 twin 20 mm mountings. The first 2 members of the class had been laid down in 1919. The next 4 ships were laid down in 1920 and completed between July 1923 and February 1924, so could be replaced in 1943-44. The tonnage to build the first 4 Atlanta-class ships was a mix of spare treaty capacity and the space available to replace the first 4 Omaha ships. The first batch of 4 Atlanta-class ships was ordered on April 25, 1939, CL-51 to CL-54. These ships were laid down between April and May 1940 and all completed by February 1942. Somewhat ironically, the outbreak of the Second World War meant that the naval treaties that had limited their design were no longer in force by the time work on them began. The second batch was ordered on September 9, 1940, probably in order to use slipways that weren't big enough to take the better Cleveland-class cruisers. These ships were built in 2 batches at the Bethlehem Shipyard, San Francisco. The intention was to use these ships with the destroyers, to protect the flanks of the battle line against air or surface threats. They thus had to have good anti-aircraft fire and be capable of defeating enemy destroyers. They weren't popular with the fleet commanders who preferred the 6-inch cruisers, but they did turn out to be effective anti-aircraft cruisers and were used to protect the vital aircraft carriers. After the war most were decommissioned very quickly. The Juno was the last in service, but she was decommissioned in 1956. Ship histories. USS Atlanta, CL-51, served in the Solomon Islands, fighting at the battles of the Eastern Solomon Islands, Santa Cruz and Savo Island. She was damaged by a Japanese torpedo at the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal and had to be scuttled. USS Juno, CL-52, also served in the Solomon Islands. She was hit by a torpedo at the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, and by a second torpedo while attempting to reach safety. This second torpedo caused a magazine explosion which destroyed her. USS San Diego, CL-53, fought off Guadalcanal and during the advance west up the Solomon Islands to Bougainville. From 1943 to the end of the war she operated with various carrier task forces. She was present at the battles of the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf and became the first U.S. warship to enter Tokyo Bay after the Japanese surrender. USS San Juan, CL-54, survived the Battle of Savo Island undamaged. She was hit by a bomb during the Battle of Santa Cruz. She spent the rest of the war with the carrier task forces, and was present at the Battle of the Philippine Sea. USS Oakland, CL-95, entered service during the invasion of the Gilbert Islands. During 1944–45 she acted with the carrier task groups and was present at the Battle of Leyte Gulf. USS Reno, CL-96, entered combat with the carrier task force in May 1944 and was with them until she was badly damaged during the Leyte campaign. She didn't return to service until the end of the war. USS Flint, CL-97, arrived in time to support the landings on Luzon at the start of 1945. For the rest of the war she supported the carrier task force in its raids on Iwo Jima, Okinawa and the Japanese home islands. USS Tucson, CL-98, arrived just in time to take part in the last attacks on the Japanese home islands. She remained in service until 1949. USS Juno, CL-119, was the longest-serving member of the class, remaining in the post-war fleet until 1956. USS Spokane, CL-120, was decommissioned in 1950. In 1966 she was selected for conversion into an experimental ship, but the work was never carried out and she was struck off the Navy list in 1972. USS Fresno, CL-121, was in service for 2.5 years before being decommissioned in May 1949.
Battleship destroyed.